All right, everybody, I'm Logan Alec, I'm a CPA, and this is your stimulus update for Wednesday, August 5th. Big news is that reportedly yesterday, Trump administration officials threw out $400 per week in supercharged unemployment benefits through early December as a possibility, and yet Democrats still haven't budged from the $600 figure. Now, even though it doesn't look like they're going to right now, let's say that Dems agree to this $400 figure. Will GOP senators go along with this figure, $400? I don't know. I really doubt it. I would be surprised if in the final negotiated bill, $400 is where they land. I would be shocked, but that's the reports right now. Bigger issue, I think, though, in these negotiations is that it's really starting to appear that the Democrats haven't really budged at all from the HEROES Act, except maybe with respect to stimulus checks going down from $1,200 per dependent to $500 per dependent, if we're to believe what Steve Mnuchin said 3 days ago when reporters caught up with him and asked him about stimulus checks. Oh, and Dems might have been willing to go down by about $15 billion on postal service funding. More on that in a bit. But seriously, folks, you have Nancy Pelosi yesterday telling CNN that the price tag she's willing to settle for is $3.4 trillion. How the heck is that settling? Because we've heard $3 trillion for the HEROES Act. I don't know, maybe it's been recalibrated to $3.4 trillion. I don't know. But point is, okay, you negotiated with Republicans for the past week, and you're at the point now where you would settle for $3.4 trillion. It makes no sense. And this is what seems to be what Republican Senate leadership was complaining about yesterday in a press conference about the negotiations. I'm not going to tell you what each one of these GOP senators said. You can see the link in the description if you want to watch the full 16-minute press conference. But I will play you what Senate Majority Whip John Thune said because it's fairly indicative.
And we all know that back in, I don't know exactly what month it was, but several weeks ago, the House Democrats passed their $3.5 trillion HEROES Act, which at the time it was suggested, and not just by us, but by lots of other folks, that it wasn't a serious effort. In fact, the New York Times, the Democrat leader's paper of record, came out and said this is a messaging bill, it's not a viable piece of legislation. And so ever since that time, we have been looking at what we've done already, making an assessment about what's working and what's not working, and getting feedback about that, and came up with, I think, a very targeted, fiscally responsible approach to dealing with the crisis that we're now in. And started to, in good faith, suggest to Democrats that it's time to start negotiating the next phase of the relief bill. They responded, passed the HEROES Act. So Mnuchin and Meadows have been trying to sit down with them and come up to, again, a reasonable, common sense solution to moving us forward in dealing with this crisis. And their response has basically been pass the HEROES Act.
So GOP senators are saying that Democrats aren't budgeting from the HEROES Act, which seems consistent with Nancy Pelosi saying yesterday that she would settle for a $3.4 trillion bill, a dollar amount Mnuchin called ridiculous, by the way. Nevertheless, somehow Chuck Schumer yesterday said that both sides have made concessions. I don't know what concessions would have been made from the Democrats that result in $3.4 trillion, except perhaps the minor ones I spoke about previously. But here's what Chuck said yesterday about the negotiations.
All right, so we spent an hour and a half. We really went down issue by issue by issue, slogging through them. They made some concessions, which we appreciated. We made some concessions, which they appreciated. We're still far away on a lot of the important issues, but we're continuing to go at it. My view, the fundamental disagreement is the scope and depth of the problem and its solution.
All right, so Schumer's statement starts off super positive, but then it gets increasingly concerning, right? Okay, so they went down issue by issue, great, that's how this is supposed to work. Then in the second sentence he said that, both sides make concessions, great, that's exactly how this is supposed to work. And then in the third sentence he says, we're still far away in a lot of the important issues. Okay, that's cool, you guys will figure it out. And then the last one, the fundamental disagreement is the scope and depth of the problem and its solution. Yikes. So y'all have a fundamental disagreement on the scope and depth of the problem and its solution. That kind of sounds like a problem to striking a deal any time. anytime soon. But on the other hand, and frankly, I don't know what to make of this, but reportedly you have White House officials yesterday saying the two sides are close to a compromise. For some reason, Trump saying yesterday he might not have to use an executive order after all because progress is being made in negotiations. I don't put too much stock in this report because just this morning, Mitch McConnell said on the Senate floor that Democratic leaders have moved about 1 inch in 8 days. And of course, he's getting his information from Mnuchin and Meadows. So we essentially have very different stories of what's going on right now with the negotiations. It seems that the Democrats, at least Schumer, wants to paint the negotiations as going well, both sides making concessions, but Republicans are shaking their heads like, it is one-sided. We know that Mnuchin said yesterday that he wants a deal done by Friday, and maybe the Dems are just waiting for Republicans to break on the key issues. I don't know, because Dems are in that position. They can sit there and say, hey, we proposed all this money for the people in the HEROES Act over 2 months ago, and you got to give it to them, Republicans, or they're going to hate your guts. Now, on the topic of Trump and presidential authority with respect to stimulus measures, the president yesterday seemed to kind of back off from his desire to use an executive order to get things done stimulus-wise. But this morning, the president was on Fox and Friends, and he was at it again, talking about exerting his authority through executive order. I'll show you the clip in a bit. But for context, one thing we've been keeping an eye on here on the channel for the past few days is the White House and Donald Trump wanting to enact various stimulus measures on their own, taking matters into their own hands through an executive order from the president, particularly regarding things like unemployment, the eviction moratorium, and yes, something to do with the payroll tax, a payroll tax deferral. Here's the president on Fox and Friends this morning.
What's your plan for businesses when it comes to the payroll tax cuts?
Well, I may do it myself. We're negotiating right now. I have the right to suspend it, and I may do it myself. I have the absolute right to suspend the payroll, to do the payroll tax. And we call it a payroll tax suspension. That's an incentive to people and small businesses and businesses generally to hire back their workers. And we're doing very well in that regard.
This notion of the payroll tax and this notion of using an executive order here to accomplish what he wants doesn't seem to be getting out of Trump's head anytime soon. And like I've said, I hope it doesn't mess up the negotiations, because we know that Mnuchin, who's the chief Republican negotiator here, isn't the biggest fan of a payroll tax cut, and obviously Democrats don't want to see one either. The last thing we want is a deal to be struck between the negotiators and then Trump messing it up with his apparently very strong desire, likely influenced by Larry Kudlow, for a payroll tax cut. But here's the interesting thing. The clip I played you is from this morning. Yesterday, Trump said with respect to the payroll tax cut that he may not have to sign executive orders because progress is being made. Somewhat of a different tone this morning, right? And that could be indicative of something. All right, so there's another stimulus negotiation meeting today. Mnuchin, Meadows, Pelosi, and Schumer will meet for the 9th day since the HEALS Act was released last Monday. Also joining them today for a portion of the negotiations will be the Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, the head of the Postal Service, because apparently as part of these negotiations, the Democrats were negotiated down by Republicans to $10 billion in additional Postal Service funding from the $25 billion Democrats originally sought. So this is kind of interesting, because when I think about the priority list of the next stimulus bill, I would kind of be tempted to put Postal Service funding kind of lower down the totem pole than, say, unemployment, stimulus checks, eviction moratoriums, etc., right, to keep roofs over heads and food on the table. I'm not discounting the importance of the mail here, right? I know there's been reports of some mail delays in some parts of the country. I know mail is very important. People get their medications through the mail. But nevertheless, is this a sign that, maybe there is this breakthrough that's not being talked about behind closed doors, because now they're talking about the Postal Service, right? Does that mean they've gotten over the larger humps, or are they just taking a break from the heavier bits of the negotiations right now? I don't know, but if you're going to look at what the Republicans are saying, it seems like the negotiations are not going that great, and the Democrats aren't really giving them a lot. I do know that yesterday Secretary Mnuchin said that he proposed an eviction moratorium. Yes, an eviction moratorium through early to mid-December, but that Democrats didn't like it because it didn't include rental assistance, because Mnuchin's proposal didn't include rental assistance or assistance to homeowners. Frankly, I don't like it because we'd be letting landlords kick people out during the holiday season, but hey, here's a better solution. Get people money who can't work anymore because their state shut down their place of business so they can pay their rent. Right? So moral of the story here is, Republicans definitely dropped the ball by really not putting their thoughts on paper urgently enough, just doing so for the first time the week that millions of Americans fell off an economic cliff, the FPUC expiration. But look, Democrats have to be willing to negotiate as well, and it's a bit frustrating when I read that Pelosi's settle number is $3.4 trillion. This is my stimulus update for this morning. If I hear anything else significant later today, I'll update you then. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.